Alright, so I was just reading through the comments on my video my video response to problem solving freedom, and Hopefully Unexpected and I were having a discussion about rationality and if it is the sole arbiter of truth, and if it's the only method for attaining happiness, and if it's the final stage, or really the only stage of human consciousness. Hopefully Unexpected was saying that even irrationality, human beings that are irrational, are using a lower form of rationality somehow, because our brains are nothing but reality processing machines. Um, and if Most of my cognitive science videos are about how those types of metaphors, that the brain is a machine, they are they're really outdated now, and it was a popular metaphor for a long time because when computers were just invented, all the AI people, the programmers, they thought they were going to be able to build a serial processor that would be more intelligent than a human being easily. They thought that that was, a foregone conclusion, that a computer would be able to be much smarter than a human in no time. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out that way because they underestimated the complexity of the brain. They didn't realize that it was a complex, dynamical system that doesn't really have a linear chain of events. It's not a processor. It doesn't really receive any inputs because its structure, the structure of the brain itself, determines, the rods and cones in the retina. When light hits them, they create their own electrical signal. So the electrical signal that the rods and cones create becomes our perception. So we don't see the light. We see our brain. And in fact, the world is our brain. I mean, we don't know anything other than that. We perceive the structure of our bodies before we ever see an objective world. And so knowing that, how are we going to gain some objective knowledge of how the brain processes reality? How are we going to break down the symbols that it uses? Because to do that, we'd have to know what the symbols represented. But if we are our brain, if we are our perception, and if we can't see outside of our own perception, we can't get beyond our senses, then how do we know what the symbols represent? How could we ever? We have no access to the world in itself. We only see the symbols. And science can't study anything but the symbols because no scientist can think otherwise. So I think that's why that type of a rationalization of consciousness, that consciousness is nothing but this logical understanding, and that every stage of human evolution is nothing but a variety of rationalization. But of course, prehistoric man had a less advanced mode of rationalization, and as human beings progressed, they got smarter and smarter and smarter. That's the myth that science tells us about human evolution. We just got smarter and smarter over time, but fundamentally, the way we think, the way our brain works, is logical sequencing of symbols, like a computer. That's the scientific, naturalistic metaphor. But not really. It's actually being supplanted by embodiment and uh, the idea that the brain doesn't process symbols. The brain enacts a world. The brain and the body are one thing, and the one thing is the organism. And the organism isn't the victim of this objective environment. The organism and the environment have always been connected, and they've always been evolving together. The organism affecting the environment as much as the environment was affecting the organism. So it's never a one-way street. It's never just environmental selection shaping the evolution of the organism. The organism is making choices, even if those choices are spontaneous choices, they're creative choices, and they're just as real as the changes that the environment makes. So if we think we're awake and we are able to control ourselves, then obviously that intelligence comes from somewhere deeper in our evolutionary history than just, a few thousand or even a few hundred years ago. Or, I guess modern science would say we haven't, the last 30 years we now know the truth, whereas the rest of humanity didn't know a thing. They were all living in total delusion. And that's my problem with rationality, that it rejects everything but itself. And it says that it's the sole source of truth. And it turns every other way of thinking into itself, really. And that's not true. The various creation myths and the myths of rebirth of all the world's religions. A lot of scientifically minded anthropologists interpret them as being just sort of illogical explanations for natural phenomena. Max Mueller had the solar myth hypothesis, which was basically that God is really the sun, and early peoples were amazed by the sunrise, so they made that a god or respected it as though it were a god. And as language evolved and man became less aware of nature and started paying more attention to his culture and other people, people started talking about the sun as though it were something more than just an object in the sky, but actually they started to personify it. And as the stories got passed on, basically our religions were born because people exaggerated and added, flair and stuff. So that's rationalizing religion, because religion isn't. How can you? Okay, let's say. So what that these early people saw the sunrise, and they thought that was God. Have you ever watched the sunrise and not just thought about something else? No, but just acknowledge what's actually going on. That you are on planet Earth and there's a star rising above the horizon, giving life to these organisms, these plants and animals. I mean, you're breathing and you're watching it all and you recognize the beauty. That is God. And you can't explain that